Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Yes, welcome to our Botswana COVID-19 webinar series today on the 16th of September 2021. My name is Dr. Godwill Gulubane. I'm a public health medicine resident in the University of Botswana, and I'm also employed in the Ministry of Health. Just as an introduction to this webinar series has been co-organized by the Ministry of Health in partnership with the University of Botswana Faculty of Medicine, Botswana Harvard Partnership, Rutgers, and Rutgers University as well. So to join the mailing list, kindly email to vindaba@globalhealth.rutgers.edu so that you can always receive information about future webinars. And kindly mute your microphones during the proceedings of this webinar. And you are free to ask questions in the chat, and we'll note your questions. And at the end, your questions will be directed to the speaker. This session will be recorded and the sessions will be made available after the session, both the fully recorded audios and the slides as well. So we would appreciate feedback in the form of emails to be sent to the email noted about vindaba@globalhealth.rutgers.edu. So we also have a YouTube page which archives all the webinars from the first webinar to our 41st webinar today. It's called the Botswana Rutgers Partnership for Health on YouTube. So you could also follow and subscribe on YouTube and also visit the previous webinars that were shared right from the beginning of the pandemic. Of interest as well, we also have a website known as the covid19portal.gov.bw. It has basically all the information needed concerning COVID-19, the COVID-19 response in Botswana. Of particular interest to you would be the document library, which has all the guidelines that are needed in terms of management of patients to quarantine and isolation, management to basically everything when it comes to the COVID-19 response. So if you need any information, be free to visit the website and download any of the documents that you may need from the library. So on today's session, we're privileged to have a speaker all the way from India. His name is Dr. Chetan Bambure. He has a very enviable career, leading from the Department of Cardiology and Cardiac Catheterization Lab at Bombay Hospital to being appointed as an assistant cardiologist with Dr. Eric Bogus. Dr. Bambure's expertise in cardiology later gave him an opportunity to become associate consultant cardiologist at Bombay Hospital. He has till date performed about 4,000 coronary angiograms and assisted and individually performed over 2,000 angioplasties. He has a special interest in heart failure and cardiac interventions. Today, he'll be giving a presentation on COVID-19 and the heart, and feel free to comment with your questions on the chat box. At the end, you'll have an opportunity to have your questions answered. Let us make welcome to the platform, Dr. Chetan Bambure. Thank you. Over to Dr. Chetan.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the kind introduction, and I'm really very happy to be talking on this platform. It's been 2 years since I have visited Gaborone, Botswana, and I really remember the good days when there was no COVID-19 and we were free to travel and free to interact with so many people. So it's been a long time, long way we have come after those 2 years, and everything has changed because of COVID-19 pandemic. So So I'm going to be talking on COVID-19 and cardiovascular disease. So I shall begin my presentation. Uzi, do I have the control? Yeah, okay.
I think click on your screen one time.
Oh, yes, got it. So it says now I am controlling there. Yes. Okay, as I came to know, this is the 41st webinar you're having on COVID-19. So I think that's a really, really good initiative, which should be done everywhere, all over the world, and to increase awareness of COVID-19. So I'm going to touch on a very few basic points on COVID-19, which probably have been already covered before, and then we'll go on to the involvement of the cardiovascular system because of COVID-19. So COVID-19 basically is caused by severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2, that is SARS-CoV-2, which is a member of the genus beta coronavirus. Like there had been 2 pandemics before, SARS-CoV and Middle East respiratory syndrome coronavirus pandemics. And this virus basically belongs to the same family. Now, the basic pathology, the basic involvement of SARS-CoV-2 is related to the respiratory system. It causes a respiratory infection, and this leads to a viral pneumonia. And the presentation is basically acute respiratory distress syndrome in not in some, in most of the patients, basically. But in addition to these respiratory syndromes, when this infection is uncontrolled, what it does is that it triggers a cytokine storm. A cytokine storm meaning there are a lot of molecules, proteins, which are released into the circulation, which are pro-inflammatory cytokines and chemokines, various chemokines like tumor necrosis factor, interleukin-1 beta, interleukin-6, and these are overproduced by the immune system, and these affect multiple organs, causing multi-organ damage. Not only that happens, it causes coagulation abnormalities in a large number of patients of COVID-19, and this causes thromboembolic events. So let us look at the cardiovascular disease. Now, early clinical data indicates that the susceptibility to COVID-19, that is a chance of getting a COVID-19 infection, and the outcome are very strongly associated with the cardiovascular disease. Now, if there is pre-existing cardiovascular disease, it leads to a higher incidence of COVID-19. Not only that, but if somebody has these comorbidities, they are associated with increased mortality. And it promotes the development of cardiovascular diseases. Myocardial injury, arrhythmias, acute coronary syndrome, and venous thromboembolism are the commonest presentations. Not only that, now children with COVID-19 disease, though it is very rare in children, but now recently what we are looking at is the third wave of COVID-19. More and more children have been found to be getting infected with COVID-19. And what they present as is something called a hyperinflammatory shock syndrome, which features like Kawasaki disease, which include cardiac dysfunction and coronary vessel abnormalities. Now, the cardiovascular manifestations of COVID-19 are quite diverse. As we know, the predominant clinical manifestation is viral pneumonia, but it can also cause myocardial injury, arrhythmias, acute coronary syndrome, and thromboembolism. This I have mentioned earlier. But important thing to be noted is that sometimes patients will present only as cardiac symptoms as the first clinical manifestation. Normally, we know that COVID-19 patients will come to us with cough and fever and breathlessness, but some patients present as cardiac symptoms, and later on we come to know that these patients have got COVID-19. So they will not present with the typical symptoms. They will come to you as a cardiac patient. And when this myocardial injury occurs during the course of COVID-19 or at presentation, the mortality in these patients is very high. So we have to look out for these patients of COVID-19 who have myocardial injury. And as I said earlier, there's a possible link between COVID-19 and a Kawasaki disease-like syndrome, which is common in children. So this diagram is basically summarizes the whole presentation. If you look at the right side, the blue is COVID-19 infection, and the left side is the cardiovascular diseases. Now, COVID-19 is a viral infection which will basically affect the lungs, causing acute respiratory distress syndrome, and there is systemic inflammation. And we are going to be treating it with drugs. Now, as of now, there have been a lot of changes in the treatment of COVID-19. We have finally narrowed it down to steroids and anticoagulation and oxygen. But in between, late last year, a number of drugs were being tried out for COVID-19, and these were prescribed rampantly without any evidence or randomly. Hydroxychloroquine, azithromycin, lopinavir, ritonavir combination, remdesivir. So at each step, there is association with involvement of the cardiovascular diseases. Now, if you look at the COVID-19 drugs which were given, most of them have got possible cardiovascular side effects. The most lethal of them being an arrhythmia. If you look at systemic inflammation produced by COVID-19, the long-term effect is thromboembolism. It can cause arrhythmia. It can cause acute coronary syndrome. It can cause myocarditis. It can cause acute cardiac injury, which in effect can cause heart failure. And if a patient already has underlying comorbidities like hypertension, previous coronary artery disease, and diabetes, there is a higher chance of cardiovascular complication, especially of heart failure. Also, if there is an underlying comorbidity, the susceptibility to COVID-19 is higher. So if a patient is elderly, has hypertension, diabetes, or coronary artery disease, there is definitely higher susceptibility to COVID-19. And in these patients, the severity of the infection is also high. Now, initially, it was thought that because of the mechanism of action of COVID-19, some commonly used cardiovascular drugs may alter the course of infection or increase it. And these were ACE inhibitors, ARB, and thiazolidinediones, which is used for diabetes. But now it is known that the drugs as such do not increase the risk of infection or worsen it. So let us look at the first involvement, that is myocardial injury and myocarditis, that is inflammation of the cardiac muscle itself. In early studies of COVID-19, it was found that there are elevated levels of cardiac biomarkers. Now, these are the enzymes, cardiac enzymes, which we do as tests in patients. So we suspect of having heart issues. We do CPK-MB, or we do troponin I or troponin T. So in early studies, it was observed in 7 to 20% of patients with COVID-19 that the cardiac biomarkers levels were elevated, and they showed ECG abnormalities. Now, whenever these patients with COVID-19 showed signs of myocardial injury, the prognosis was worse. So how do you diagnose myocardial injury or myocarditis? It's basically based on investigations, which are the cardiac markers, CPK-MB, TROP-T or TROP-I, ECG changes, and a 2D echocardiography, which will show that there is reduced cardiac function, reduced cardiac output. And these patients will present to you with chest pain or breathlessness. Let us look at a couple of case examples. Now, this was a 53-year-old female who presented to the ER with breathlessness. ECG showed diffuse changes. Unfortunately, I don't have the ECGs, but she presented with diffuse ECG changes. A bedside echo revealed a dilated left ventricle with a reduction in the left ventricular ejection fraction, which was around 35. And there were wall motion abnormalities. Now, wall motion abnormalities are actually typical of ischemia, but in this case, a cardiac MRI showed diffuse biventricular hypokinesia and a thin rim of pericardial effusion, which is typical of myocarditis. Another case, a 37-year-old gentleman presenting to the emergency room with chest pain and ST elevation, which was diffuse. Now, ST elevation in acute myocardial infarction usually occurs in fixed leads, where it may be the anterior leads, it may be the inferior leads. But if there is a diffuse ST elevation across all leads, you're looking at something else. Bedside echo revealed a dilated left ventricle and an ejection fraction of 0.25. Now, both these patients were diagnosed as fulminant myocarditis and treated with methylprednisolone and eventually recovered completely. So now let us look at acute coronary syndrome in COVID-19 patients. They usually present as an ST elevation MI, more common, or they may present to you as a non-ST elevation MI or unstable angina with ECG changes. Obviously, the diagnosis in these patients is confirmed by coronary angiography. And when we do an angiography, we find that some of these patients have a thrombus in the coronary artery, or they may have lesions which require PCI. Now, if there is only thrombus, they can be treated with by just thromboaspiration or treatment with thrombolysis or anticoagulation. Or if there's a critical lesion, they may require angioplasty with stent implantation. Now, even in the absence of systemic inflammation, COVID-19 can cause ACS. That means that you can have a patient who comes to the emergency room or in the OPD with chest pain, you do an ECG, it shows, say, an anterior wall MI, and no other signs of inflammation anywhere else. You may not have fever, may not have cough, the markers of inflammation may be normal, and yet this patient can eventually turn out to be COVID-19 positive. There are various mechanisms which are postulated why these patients will present as ACS. It might involve plaque rupture, the patient may have a coronary spasm, or there might be microthrombi owing to the systemic inflammation or the cytokine storm, which I mentioned earlier. Now, this is a very important line, and I would like to stress on it a little later also. Compared to the pre-COVID period, there have been lesser reported cases of acute coronary syndrome. And there has been an increased number of out-of-hospital cardiac arrests. Why this has been happening, there have been a lot of theories, and we have experienced it practically. I will deal with this a little later at the end of the presentation. Now, heart failure. A lot of patients will present as heart failure, which is a very common observed complication related to COVID-19. How do you diagnose heart failure? It is based on a blood test, which is NT-proBNP. The NT-proBNP levels, when they are high, it is almost diagnostic of heart failure. 2D echo will obviously show the condition of the left ventricle, the size, and what is the ejection fraction. And an MRI, if possible, will confirm it. But usually it's the NT-proBNP and 2D echo which will give you a diagnosis of heart failure. Now, if you look at the incidences in the studies, the incidence reported is of 24% in all patients and 49% in patients who died. Elevated levels of NT-proBNP were identified in 49% of all patients and 85% of those who died, which is quite significant. So heart failure is one of the major causes of deaths in patients with COVID-19. Again, it can be a result of exacerbation of pre-existing conditions. The patient may have hypertension, diabetes, coronary artery disease, or subclinical cardiac dysfunction, which may have not been diagnosed earlier, but now since the patient has become COVID-19 positive, heart failure may be precipitated by the infection itself. There are various triggering factors like high fever. We have patients who COVID-19 has high fever, tachycardia, excessive hydration, and impaired renal function. All these can trigger heart failure. Now, if a patient, for example, excessive hydration, meaning a patient with COVID-19 comes, he's getting fever, hypotension, and without knowing the left ventricular ejection fraction, the patient may be pumped with IV fluids, and this itself can result in heart failure if there is an underlying cardiac dysfunction. Since the presentation of COVID-19 is like an acute respiratory distress syndrome, but it is also similar to pulmonary edema. So both of them can coexist together. And not only that, acute myocardial injury, acute coronary syndrome, which is triggered by COVID-19, can aggravate pre-existing heart disease, or in fact, it can provoke contractile dysfunction. We define heart failure with reduced ejection fraction as on the echo with an ejection fraction of less than 40. Now, sometimes we have patients who have subclinical cardiac dysfunction, like for example, their ejection fraction may be around 45, 50, which comes in the moderate range, and they are fine. But once they're infected with COVID-19 and all the problems associated with COVID-19 occur, this ejection fraction can suddenly drop down from 45 to 30, and these patients will go into cardiac failure because of the contractile dysfunction. In advanced stages, the response of the immune system to infection can also trigger development of stress-induced cardiomyopathy or cytokine-related myocardial dysfunction, which is associated with sepsis. Now, many times, what does this mean? That patient's LV function or left ventricular ejection function may be absolutely normal. Patient comes to you with symptoms and signs of COVID-19. He's diagnosed to be positive. He's under treatment, and a few days later, he may develop breathlessness. A baseline echo may be normal, but after a few days, if you do the 2D echocardiography and see that suddenly the ejection fraction has dropped down from 60 to 30, 35%, and it's typical of stress-induced cardiomyopathy to see that the apical segments of the heart are not contracting and the basal segments are contracting properly, which is called a Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, which is typical of stress-induced cardiomyopathy. And this is very common when there is sepsis. Of course, the treatment of heart failure, we'll come to it later. It's a routine treatment of heart failure, which we follow if there is no COVID-19. Coming to the arrhythmias and sudden cardiac arrest part. Now, this is a very common manifestation. This has happened to me. Patients have come to me in the OPD clinic with just one complaint, that they have heart palpitations. Now, this can happen during COVID infection also, and this can happen after COVID infection also. For example, a person may have had a very mild COVID infection, just mild fever, body ache, treated at home, recovered completely. And suddenly after a few days, the patient starts getting palpitations, very high. And nowadays, patients do monitor their oxygen levels and pulse rate at home with a pulse oximeter. So they immediately, when there is palpitations, they look at their heart rate, and suddenly they find it 120, 130, 140, and then come to the OPD. And you examine them, you do an ECG, it shows sinus tachycardia with a heart rate of 120, 130. You do a 2D echo, which is normal, and comes positive. So this is a very common manifestation. Now, arrhythmia does not have to be something which is very lethal or very bizarre or dynamic, something like a ventricular tachycardia arrhythmia. It can be as something as subtle as just sinus tachycardia, and which persists for a long time, not just the starting. It may persist for a few months, so that you may have to give them medicines to slow down their heart rate. And it can continue for months after the person has actually recovered from COVID infection also. Now, when these patients present with palpitations and you do cardiac markers and they have a high level of troponin T, they are more likely to develop malignant arrhythmias, such as ventricular tachycardia and either ventricular fibrillation or atrial fibrillation. So these arrhythmias can be triggered because of myocardial injury or other systemic causes, such as just fever can trigger arrhythmias, sepsis, hypoxia, and even electrolyte abnormalities will result in arrhythmias. Very important to know, a lot of antiviral medications and antibiotics can induce arrhythmias. Notoriously, it's the hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin. Now we know that these medicines really don't work, but there was a time when there was a sudden rush for chloroquine. People were looking for hydroxychloroquine, azithromycin. They used to read about it, that they can cure COVID, and there was a mad rush of patients, public, everybody to go and just purchase chloroquine and take it, but not knowing that these medications, not only just chloroquine and azithromycin separately, if taken together, they are known to induce arrhythmias. So that's very important to remember. And of course, coagulation abnormality and thrombosis. I believe pulmonary embolism has been discussed before on the forum, but coagulation abnormalities and thrombosis are very common with COVID-19, especially thromboembolic events. Most of the patients with COVID-19 have elevated levels of D-dimer. There is a modest reduction in platelet counts, and there is a slight prolonged prothrombin time. All this leads to a hypercoagulable state because there is also levels of fibrinogen and factor VIII which are elevated in this patient. And there is a tendency for the blood to clot, whether in the veins or in the artery. If the blood clots in the veins, it is called venous thromboembolism. They will present to you with deep vein thrombosis and pulmonary embolism. It has been a very common presentation over the last few months. Patients have come to me in the clinic with just breathlessness. Now, when a patient comes to you with breathlessness, he says, I am only breathless. I don't have any fever. You check the patient, there is no fever. He's breathless. He's hypoxic. You see the oxygen levels is 80, 85. So you wonder, he's not febrile. He's breathless. He's got tachycardia. Could be pulmonary embolism. So you do a 2D echo. 2D echo shows a dilated right ventricle, right atrium. You see a high pulmonary artery pressure, and you think, oh yes, this is probably pulmonary thromboembolism. Do a CT angiogram. It confirms your diagnosis. So now you have a patient of pulmonary embolism who has no fever. So what do you do next? Check his COVID test, and the COVID test comes positive. So this is a very, very common presentation. The patient will present to you as pulmonary embolism and not as a febrile illness. And actually it turns out to be COVID-19. Now that is in the veins. Now these thrombotic events can occur in the arteries. We have seen patients come with large vessel ischemic stroke. The presentation is just stroke, no fever, no breathlessness. The patient comes to the ER with hemiparesis, paraparesis. And on investigation, we find there is a large ischemic stroke. They have presented with acute limb ischemia. There's a thrombus blocking the femoral artery. Patient comes with acute limb ischemia and without any other symptoms of COVID. You do a COVID test, it comes positive. Not only that, we have seen patients who have come with mesenteric artery thrombosis, who have later on turned out to be COVID-19 positive. Similarly, cerebral venous sinus thrombosis has come as a presentation of COVID-19. As I said earlier, in children, there's a Kawasaki disease-like syndrome. Now, children are thought to be less susceptible than adults to COVID-19. And the majority of children who have COVID-19 are asymptomatic or present with mild symptoms. For example, I've seen a family in which the grandfather had severe COVID infection, had pulmonary involvement, and had to be admitted in the ICU. And after a couple of days at home, the family, the son, the daughter-in-law, and their children, his grandchildren, 9 years, 5 years, had little fever and some body ache, and they turned out to be COVID-19 positive. Very mild symptoms. Sometimes they may be asymptomatic also. But in very few children, it has been found to present as a hyperinflammatory syndrome with clinical presentation including fever, variable rash, conjunctivitis, peripheral edema, extremity pain, and severe gastrointestinal symptoms. And a very common finding, this is diagnosed on echocardiography. You find very echo-bright coronary vessels, they are dilated, and this is diagnostic of Kawasaki disease. Now, this is a very simple presentation of the basic molecular level pathology because of COVID-19. Now, the main effector is the angiotensin 2. Now, this is the renin-angiotensin aldosterone system, which is affected by the COVID-19 virus. Normally, angiotensin 1 is converted to angiotensin 2 in the presence of angiotensin converting enzyme. And this angiotensin 2 is the main effector, which is harmful for the cells, usually the cardiovascular cells and the lung cells, and this is responsible for the injury. Now, this angiotensin 2 is degraded or changed by ACE2, angiotensin converting enzyme 2, to angiotensin 127, which is protective. We know that ACE inhibitors act on the ACE enzymes and prevent conversion of angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. What COVID infection does that it downregulates the ACE2, which is protective. Now, once ACE2 is downregulated, the angiotensin 2 levels build up. And here, when the angiotensin 2 levels build up, it affects the angiotensin 2 receptor type 1, and this increases the cardiovascular disease and lung injury. As I said earlier, what about cardiovascular effects of COVID-19 drugs? And this is very important because my country here, there has been a rampant use of certain drugs, even after knowing that they have not been proved to be effective, but it sorts of prompts practitioners to use them in patients more like a placebo, gives a placebo effect, but they are really not mindful of the cardiovascular effect of this chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine. There had been a rampant use. Now it is now, of course, because the guidelines have come that these drugs are no longer useful. The prescription has more or less been stopped. But throughout the last year, the first drug which was given the moment a patient comes COVID-19 positive was hydroxychloroquine or chloroquine. Please remember, these drugs are very potent arrhythmic agents. And when you combine them with something like azithromycin, which is known to prolong the QT interval, be sure that your patient is going to land up in a very dangerous arrhythmia, especially ventricular tachycardia. Now, remdesivir has been used quite frequently now. And now we know that it really doesn't have any benefit. So it has been taken off the treatment of COVID by the WHO. So it's no longer indicated. So far, luckily, prominent cardiovascular effects have not been reported, but who knows, as with more widespread use, they might become apparent. The combination of lopinavir and ritonavir, it was hailed as really an elixir for the treatment of COVID-19, but now we know that it's again not effective, and it might interact actually with common cardiovascular drugs which are metabolized by the cytochrome P453A4, and these include antiarrhythmic agents, antiplatelet drugs, and anticoagulants. So it is actually going to interfere with the antiplatelet drugs, interfere with the anticoagulants, and cause adverse effects. So coming to the treatment, now the basic treatment of COVID-19 now, today, it is steroids and anticoagulation along with oxygen supplementation period. Any patient who has a severe COVID infection, and severe, we say severe when the oxygen levels have dropped down to less than 92% or less than 90%. These are the patients who need hospitalization, and the moment they are hospitalized, and if they have hypoxia, the mainstay of treatment is steroids. And all these patients, all the hospitalized patients, have to be on anticoagulation. Now, whether you give, initially you can give low molecular weight heparin as injectable anticoagulation, and later on you shift. But the first few days you have to anticoagulate them. And most of these patients will require a long time anticoagulation. If you can't just give them anticoagulation for 5 days and stop. They might come with pulmonary embolism after a week, 15 days, 1 month. I have had patients who have presented to me 1 month after recovery of COVID-19 with pulmonary embolism. So in patients who have been admitted with hypoxia, it's better to anticoagulate them. Now, again, there is no consensus on the duration of anticoagulation. Some people will say give for 3 weeks, some say 6 months. It's no studies so much, but anticoagulation is required. And personally, and going by the studies, an average of 1 month of anticoagulation is necessary in these patients. Now, you can either give warfarin or acetylene, or you can, we prefer newer oral anticoagulants like rivaroxaban or apixaban in these patients. Of course, oxygen supplementation remains the baseline treatment for patients who have hypoxia. Now, coming to treatment in coronary disease, acute coronary syndrome. Now, now we are like probably at the end of the second wave, just near the beginning of the third wave in India. So when there was the peak first wave and second wave, a lot of patients coming to ER with acute myocardial infarction, we suspected that they might have COVID. We prefer to thrombolize them, because knowing that COVID-19 has a coagulation issue, these patients are best thrombolized. That was the preferred treatment during that period. Thrombolize these patients, stabilize them, and then do a coronary angiogram and see if it was really thrombus or it was a lesion which needed angioplasty later on. And we were surprised at many times that a patient came to the emergency room with acute myocardial infarction, typical ST elevation MI, thrombolize them with either, say, retiplase or streptokinase, responded, and we did an elective angiogram after a few days. Surprisingly, we found the coronary is normal. So therefore, that was thrombus, which was taken care of by thrombolysis, and eventually they didn't require PCI, but sometimes these patients did need PCI because they had an underlying coronary artery disease. Of course, where indicated, you have to do an angioplasty, but preferably elective was the norm. Now we have come back to primary angioplasties and decide after the coronary angiogram and the COVID report, what does the patient actually need. All the patients who have a severe COVID infection with hypoxia, etc., need to be very closely monitored for arrhythmias. We have to keep them in the ICU, monitor for arrhythmias. They may require antiarrhythmic agents like amiodarone, or sometimes even if they have a VTVF, they may need to be cardioverted. But even after discharge, a lot of these patients, as I said, come back to the OPD with palpitations. In such patients, we may have to do a Holter study, a 24-hour Holter studies, to see if they are having subtle arrhythmias, and they may have to be treated accordingly. But the drug of choice in these patients who have palpitations is usually beta blockers, and they respond very well. Patients who come to the OPD with just palpitations, sinus tachycardia, just give them propranolol or metoprolol, and they respond wonderfully. Obviously, avoid using cardiotoxic drugs, hydroxychloroquine, chloroquine, azithromycin, remdesivir, lopinavir are no longer indicated for COVID-19 infections. And of course, the treatment of heart failure is the basic treatment: oxygen, diuretics, inotropic support. If the blood pressure is low, you may have to give an infusion of noradrenaline or dobutamine or dopamine, and treat accordingly after the patient stabilizes with the routine, with the usually recommended treatment of heart failure. Now, what about the long-term cardiovascular effects? I don't know whether we are still in a position to study long-term cardiovascular effects, but since it's been more than a year, it still needs research. But there are a lot of patients who come to the emergency room with various symptoms which probably are long-term cardiovascular effects of COVID-19. Now, they come 1 month, 2 months later with tachycardia. Excuse me. Orthostatic hypotension. Sorry, this is hypotension, not hypertension. Orthostatic hypotension. It's a spelling. It's an error on my part. Orthostatic hypotension typically presents as if a patient is, if a person is lying down and he or she stands up suddenly, and there might be a little giddiness or a little loss of vision transiently or a loss of balance. So that means the blood pressure is dropping. And in fact, if you check the blood pressure in this patient, you might find a drop of 20 or 30 millimeters mercury drop in these patients. And you have to really watch out for venous thromboembolism. Late presentations, very common. 15 days later, 1 month later, these patients can present with venous thromboembolism. You have to monitor the cardiac biomarkers closely. If on admission during the hospital, if you find the markers high, then don't go by just one value. Please repeat them and make sure that the cardiac biomarkers are recovering gradually. Follow-up of these patients is very important. You need to do 2D echocardiography, or if required, very rarely, MRI we do very, very rarely, but echocardiography is indicated in most of the patients who have been admitted with severe COVID-19 disease. Now, this is a very simple and wonderful test which evaluates the response of your patients to your treatment. Okay. So this is a 6-minute walk test. You just make the patient walk for 6 minutes and you regularly monitor for any symptoms. You look at the heart rate and you look at the oxygen saturation. If the patient is able to monitor able to walk for 6 minutes without a drop in oxygen saturation, without significant tachycardia, that means he's recovering well. Okay, so this is a very good test, not just for patients recovering for COVID-19. It's a good test for patients who are recovering from heart failure as well. It tells you an idea about the treatment which is that it's working or not, or whether the patient is worsening. So this is a very simple and very good test which can be done. Holter monitoring, as I said earlier, if patients are complaining of palpitations, sometimes giddiness, syncope, Holter monitoring is a good test for these arrhythmias. And of course, anticoagulation is another mainstay of treatment. Now, steroids we are just going to give for a short period and then taper them off. But some of these patients will need anticoagulation for, depending on how severe the infection was, how severe the pulmonary embolism was, whether it was a thrombotic event, and it may be for a short term, or in certain patients, it may have to be long term, for example, 6 months. The maximum I have given after COVID has been 6 months anticoagulation. So coming back to the one fact which I said earlier, that ever since COVID-19 started last year, there have been lesser reported cases of acute coronary syndrome compared to the pre-COVID period. And important that there have been an increased number of out-of-hospital cardiac arrests. Now, why is it so? Why does this happen? Let's go and see a case. Now, this is a patient who was my patient, regularly under my treatment, 52-year-old male, diabetic, He developed chest pain at home. This happened sometime during the last year. It was the peak of the first wave of COVID in September in India. He developed chest pain. He tried home remedies for antacids and etc. And he refused to go to the hospital for fear of COVID-19. There's a fear that if you're going to a hospital, you might acquire COVID-19. Waited at home for 48 hours after the onset of pain, became breathless, and finally the relatives brought him to the hospital and he was literally gasping. ECG showed an anterior wall ST elevation. MI, the blood pressure was hardly 70 systolic. Just as we were assessing him, patient went into ventricular tachycardia, ventricular fibrillation, and expired in the emergency room. Another case, a 25-year-old male who was an operated case of congenital heart disease in the childhood, developed fever and diarrhea. He was given home treatment for fever, diarrhea, and again, fear of COVID hospitals, did not want to go. The parents did not want to take him to the hospital. Was managed at home for 3 weeks, after which he developed high-grade fever and breathlessness, orthopnea. Echo showed a VSD. There were large vegetations and he had gone into infective endocarditis and he could not be saved. So the point which I'm trying to emphasize is here that now there's a certain fear developed, which is of course now coming down with the number of cases. There's a fear of going to the hospital. But because of this lesser reporting of ACS, higher out of hospital cardiac arrest, European Society of Cardiology has started a Can't Pause a Heart initiative, which says that you can't actually pause a heart. Whenever there are symptoms, you need to rush to the hospital. So even if there is a pandemic, this is basically for education of the general public and the patients, that you have to emphasize that even during the pandemic, if somebody you know is experiencing symptoms which are like a heart attack, you should not wait. Just because you're in the middle of a pandemic and you're afraid of COVID, you should not wait. You just need to go to a hospital because there could be irreparable damage. Typical pressure, burning, tight feeling in the chest, sudden shortness of breath. This may be a heart attack, and do not ignore these signs because patients ignore them for 1 day, 2 day, 3 days, and they end up with an out of hospital or on the way to the hospital cardiac arrest. So thank you very much for a patient hearing. This is these are my contact details in case you need to contact them. And I think we can, if you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Dr. Shetan, for the very insightful presentation. If we have any questions, we could show by raising our hands so we can direct our questions to Dr. Shetan. While we're waiting for questions, Dr. Shetan, mine would be about vaccines and the side effects that are heart-related. Maybe you could just touch briefly on that, because we see some information here and there about some vaccines having some sort of side effects that are cardiac-related, although the benefits outweigh the risks, if at all there is any side effects of such.
Absolutely. As you have rightly said, the benefits far outweigh the side effects, and the side effects which have been reported are extremely minor now. If you look at the percentages, it's extremely minuscule, and it's very difficult to even attribute the side effects to the vaccine, because even as a routine, these side effects or presentations which could be like thrombotic events can occur. So my advice is that vaccination is the only alternative for this disease. Everybody must get vaccinated. That is what I emphasize for all my patients. A lot of them are afraid about the side effects, etc., which I understand, but more of it is hearsay. A lot of them will hear from here and there, read about it, and they'll say that we're afraid to take vaccine. But I think those fears are like unfounded, and everybody should get vaccinated. As of now, I've been seeing so many patients. I have not seen any major side effects of vaccine. See, sometimes what happens, patients take one dose of vaccine, and let's say after 15 days, 20 days, 1 month later, they are down with COVID infection. So they need to understand that the vaccination is not going to give you protection with a single dose. The complete protection is going to come after 14 days, after the second dose. So in between, if a patient or a person is exposed to COVID, he will get COVID. So, and whatever patients who have really actually got COVID-19 after 2 doses of vaccination has been extremely mild infection. So the emphasis has to be that everybody has to get vaccinated, and more people who get vaccinated, more and more we approach the herd immunity.
Thank you.
Welcome.
In the absence of any questions, our chat box is empty. I will hand over to Dr. Lebelonyana to give us the closing remarks.
Let me take her place and thank Dr. Shetan for the insightful presentation. He was standing in, we were supposed to have MRI this week. They asked to postpone, so we will see them next week. So next week, same time, same place, we will have Medical Rescue International Botswana, who will be here to tell us about their experience during COVID-19, rendering emergency evacuations and so on. Thank you very much for patronizing our webinar. Please continue to spread the word so that we can reach as many people as possible for them to benefit from these webinars. Have a good afternoon and good evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. A good day to all of you. And it was great presenting on this platform. Looking forward to getting involved again at a future date.
Thank you. We'll take you up on that.
Welcome.